This is Tornado Talk, a weekly podcast about one of nature's most fascinating phenomenons. Share your tornado story online by email or call us toll-free 800-439-1570. That's 800-439-1570. Now, meteorologist Jennifer Naramore and Dan Holliday, Tornado Talk is on.
Joplin, Missouri, a city of approximately 50,000 people.
Graduation day for high school students, May 22nd, 2011.
Joplin lies in the heart of Tornado Alley. Everyone is all too familiar with severe weather.
But no lifetime of experience living there could prepare anyone to fathom what was about to happen.
Ma'am, this is a Jeff Petrosky storm chaser. I have a large destructive tornado and on the southwest side of Joplin. Notified, large tornado on the ground doing massive damage. F5, it's an F5 going to the city. F5 county. Oh my God.
Storm chaser Jeff Petrosky played a key role in warning the public and stayed behind to help with search and rescue.
I knew what I had to do, and that was, yell out for help, who needed help. And when I did that, there were literally, sounded like cries from every direction. People were screaming, buried under the rubble. And I just went to the first people I could find.
KKOW Radio's Bobby Wilkerson.
I remember walking out of the door, and there was a stuffed animal in our front yard, along with tons of other debris, and thinking, oh my God, that's some little kid's stuffed animal, and now where's the little kid?
Joplin radio newsman Steve Scott.
The National Weather Service and the Storm Prediction Center have been talking about this possible event for probably at least 4 or 5 days, maybe even a little bit longer than that, and kept warning us that there was a high probability of something that was going to happen on that day. In fact, that weekend.
Meteorologist Mike Smith, author of When the Sirens Were Silent.
Because people were told after the siren sounded the first time that there was no threat to Joplin, unless they were sitting there monitoring the radio or TV, they had no way of knowing that their situation had changed from relative safety to mortal danger.
And Rebecca Williams, who pulled together the community with Joplin Tornado Info on Facebook.
I would get on people's pages and pertinent pages and say, we've launched this Facebook page, Joplin Tornado Info, look for it. And within 2 hours, we were over 10,000.
This is Tornado Talk, our tribute to the people of Joplin, Missouri, on the anniversary of one of the most devastating tornadoes on American soil.
It all started like this. A complex of storms tracked in from extreme southeastern Kansas into far southwestern Missouri and produced the tornado that crossed straight through the heart of Joplin. The National Weather Service conducted a storm survey in the aftermath, and they concluded the twister caused EF5 damage. Maximum winds were in excess of 200 miles per hour. The tornado stayed on the ground for 22.1 miles, and at one time was anywhere from 3/4 up to a mile wide. Over 1,000 people were injured and 161 were killed. The study showed the tornado began its path at 5:34 in the afternoon, lifting at 6:12, northeast of Granby, Missouri.
A survey from the American Meteorological Society said total property damage was in excess of $2 billion. The city of Joplin determined the storm generated 3 million cubic yards of debris.
Dan, here's a portion of the National Weather Service survey about the damage that they had seen there. Some of the damage indicators used to rate the center portion of this tornado track from EF2 to EF5 wind speeds was the sheer destruction of well-built homes and businesses that were swept from their foundation or crushed or pancaked in place or blown and piled into other debris. Over 15,000 vehicles, including buses, tractor-trailers, and vans, were tossed over 200 yards to several blocks, with some being destroyed beyond recognition. Some were rolled into balls. Steel roof support trusses looked like paper. Main support beams were twisted and curved. Asphalt was ripped up from the Walmart parking lot. And then there were the strange and unusual things a tornado's wind will often do. A wooden chair with 4 legs was embedded into an exterior wood and stucco wall, and a rubber hose was impaled through a tree.
The tornado was given an EF5 rating, and there is debate on that rating. The EF5 rating was mainly arrived at by the total destruction of the sizes and weight of vehicles. Concrete porches and slabs were tossed and deformed, and the St. John's Hospital building structure and foundation were compromised. The damage was likely caused by winds exceeding 200 miles per hour.
The debate comes in because a 2013 article in the Joplin Globe said a civil engineer study showed more than 83% of the damage was caused by winds of 135 miles per hour or less. That would be an EF2. The engineers concluded that because structures were so poorly built to withstand wind, flying debris from houses made damage in the tornado zone much worse. 4% of the destruction was linked to an EF4. The investigators said they found no EF5 damage to buildings at all. The National Weather Service was not swayed to change their EF5 rating. Bill Davis at the National Weather Service in Springfield said it was not easy to come up with a rating. They knew there was EF4 damage and only a very small area of EF5 damage.
What is your tornado tale? If you have a story you'd like to share, call us toll-free 800-439-1570. That's 800-439-1570.
Since 1994, Jeff Petrowski has worked in sales for Barron Weather. When he's not demonstrating new technology, he's in the field watching for storms. Jeff says he's seen more than 900 tornadoes in his life, but Joplin was the worst. Years later, he remembers exactly how that day began.
There was going to be like a double point coming east out of Wichita, and kind of a warm front and a little bit of a draw line in the wave in the southwest flow. And the models progged, supercells in southeast Kansas and northeast Oklahoma to develop by mid-afternoon and track up toward southwest Missouri and northwest Arkansas. And so Kathy and I left Tulsa at around 11, drove up Highway 169 into southeast Kansas. First storms were up west of Parsons. There were supercells, they're rotating, a couple wall clouds, but I noticed that the winds back toward Joplin and the far northeast Oklahoma were more out of the southeasterly direction, and that's where the higher Cape was poking. And I thought, let's go east, southeast here. So we went and left the storm at Parsons and dropped southeast, and when we got over to west Joplin, about 20 miles, the sky looked different. And I related to like May 3rd, 99 in southwest Oklahoma, where the towers were going up, they were already rotating. And I was like, wow. I told Kathy, Kathy, last time I saw this, we had really big tornadoes. Something bad's going to happen. And that was about 4 o'clock.
About 15 to 20 minutes later, Jeff and his wife, Kathy, were eyeing a storm that was near the town of Carl Junction, Missouri, north of Joplin.
And we followed it into southwest Missouri there. That storm put out an outflow battery that surged back to the northern city limits of Joplin. And about that time, the meso-low was forming out of northeast Oklahoma and far southeast Kansas. And on that meso-low, a brand new storm erupted. And by then, you had this deep northeast wind running from downtown Joplin back southwestward to this developing storm. That storm landed on that boundary, and as it came into the city, the storm started rotating violently. And we came into the north side of the city and went to the west of Joplin about 4 miles, and watched the new wall cloud form. And this will happen around Officer Brewer and a training cadet that day in Joplin. Policeman parked in the center median, pulled up the side and said, "Hey, guys, the developing tornado's coming down right now. It's going to be really bad. Here it comes." And of course, they could see the big hook on my radar. And I guess at the time, they tell me later that my animation about how bad it's getting ready to happen, and them seeing my radar with the hook, and I was determined. I said, "Look, you got to get the starter stone again. It's going to get tornadoes coming."
Hey, guys, the tornado's trying to come down right here. The winds are on the north, and it's coming back around. The tornado's right here. It's coming on the ground right here. Hey, get the sirens going. Get the sirens going. I'm telling you.
They did call dispatch right then. They told them. I called 911 right after I left the officers.
This is a Jeff Petrowski storm chaser. I have a large destructive tornado on the southwest side of Joplin. Notified. Large tornado on the ground doing massive damage. What does it mean? It's an F5. It's an F5 going through the city. F5 county. Oh my God. And as it was coming south, I could see the tornado on the ground, power flashes. And I told them I was backing them on the 911 call to sound the sirens again, and they did. And the tornado, started coming down 20th Street, just off the 20th Street there, and went to about 3/4 mile wide. And I noticed that just after it hit the hospital, there was a subdivision south of me, about a half mile. I could see the building standing and houses standing. And as the front wall of the tornado was accelerating to the northeast there and getting bigger and bigger, as soon as the back edge of the tornado passed
Scheffeldecker, and I was looking due south. I saw everything that was standing 30 seconds before was 100% gone. There was nothing behind the tornado standing, and I was like, oh no, it's an F5. And me and Kathy went east on 20th Street, right north of the core of the tornado, and it was just horrific. I mean, it was a really bad tornado, really bad scene. And then over by Iowa Street, near the Joplin High School, my driver's side window blew out from flying debris. So we stopped the vehicle. At that time, we saw a car had been picked up and hurled to the field, and the occupants, it landed upside, the right side up, and they just were basically crawling out of the car. They were throwing about 4 blocks.
Let's go see if they're okay.
I am. They're coming out of the car. They're coming out of the car. They were thrown.
Are you guys all right?
Something that's overwhelming feeling told me to go down Iowa Street, which is where the high school is located, the Joplin High School. And on Iowa Street, there's a bunch of homes there on the west side of Iowa Street, all the way back to the hospital there for a good 1.5, 2 miles, and everything was leveled. I pulled up there and got out of the car, and I told Kathy to start putting out tweets that you can need massive help, and walked down Iowa Street, and first thing that came up on is a dog crawling out of the car.
Oh, come here, baby. It's okay. It's okay, sweetie. I know. Oh, God. Oh, God.
Just had to, I knew what I had to do, and that was, yell out for help, who needed help. And when I did that, they were literally, sound like Christ from every direction.
Anybody help? Oh, my God.
I heard him screaming, Chris!
Kathy, bring the stuff!
There's people!
Kathy!
There's somebody in here!
Oh, my God. Oh, my God. I'm so sorry.
Phone in the car?
For the cars. Hello? 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 Hello?
And I just went to the first people I could find. And unfortunately, the first people I find, 2 of them had already gone.
It's been almost an hour now since the tornado. It's 6:45. The tornado's ripped through Joplin, southwest side of Joplin. I've already uncovered about... this is horrible. First thing I come up on is people that didn't make it.
The house next door, there were people screaming over there. It's been about an hour and a half digging 2 people out of the house, a lady in a wheelchair and her daughter, both critically injured, and got them out of the debris. That was a really bad scene also. And the elderly lady later died. The other one had multiple surgeries to recover. And then behind that, as I looked around the neighborhood, everything's gone. I had a dog behind me back west on the next street. I believe it was Oklahoma Street, that continuously barking at me on top of the rubble. So I think somebody's buried under the rubble. So I went to the next block behind me and dug that person out. While I was there, I looked to the north, and it's kind of like in a hurricane or a tornado, a real intense tornado, like, for example, that tornado, if you were on the right side of the dead center of the tornado, it would take the house and people, and it would blow them to the north and east. Because you're in the forward flank of the tornado, it would blow you, across the street or to the right. If you're immediately to the left of the core of the tornado, it would actually take the people in the houses and blow them back to the west. So when you look at people, again, in the tornado, this is a state of about 200 yards, where it goes from right to left. I had people that were throwing their houses that were buried in the rubble back westward. So they got their houses on the east side of the street, and they were actually buried in rubble on the west side of the street. So it made it very complex to dig people out. But I found a lady, I saw literally a pair of legs sticking up in the air, upside down. And I'm like, oh, no. And I went over there, and it was a very elderly lady. She was not injured, thankfully. And she basically just needed help getting out of the rubble. And I picked her up and got her out of the rubble. And she, her first comment to me was, wow, that was a big one. I said, yes, it was.
Steve Scott, now news director for American Media Investments Radio Group in Pittsburgh and Joplin, found himself narrowly missing the path of the tornado several times that afternoon.
That particular afternoon, as we were approaching the 5 o'clock hour, the wife told me that we had to go to Walmart to pick up a prescription that she had because she had run completely out. And since we live close to the 15th Street Walmart, that's where we decided to go. We walked in. It was sunny at that time at 5:17 on that Sunday afternoon. Just as we got through the first doors, the tornado sirens went off for the first time. We went in, she got her medicine, and they started shutting everything down and asking everybody to go to the back of the store. I told one of the managers that I was a weather spotter for KKOW radio, and I was supposed to go out and cover the storm, and they said, okay. They cashed us out. We were actually the last paying customers out of the store before it got hit by the tornado. From that point, we went out to what they call Spot the Storm, and I arrived on location. It was about 32nd and Connecticut Street in Joplin. And at that time, I heard our coverage on our radio station say that spotters had found a tornado on the ground just to the west of Joplin. From my vantage point, I could see it. I called into the station and told them, I'm looking at the tornado right now. Get me on the air immediately, which they did. I was describing what I was seeing, which at the time I didn't realize what all it was hitting, but I was seeing debris, of course, the total blackness of the cloud of the tornado, seeing the debris and seeing all the bright bluish-green flashes of where transformers were blowing up. And I was describing this live on the air, and at that point, back at the station, they got on and told me that I needed to get out of my position because, according to radar, it was headed right to where I was at. We quickly got out of that position, went to another place that we thought would be safe, and when we turned around and pulled into the parking lot there at a truck stop at Highway 71 South, which is now Interstate 49 South and I-44, the tornado was on the ground about 2 blocks in front of us. So we had to take evasive action, which I did. And as we were getting out of there, a second white vortex, a smaller tornado, came around, and it was about a block behind us as we were hightailing it to get out of there. At that point, we still did not realize how much damage had occurred, but I did tell my wife, I said, that storm took a right turn, so that had to be a very, very strong tornado. It took us almost 3 hours to get from that point back to our home because of the devastation. When we finally were able to get into the area to get to our home, we ended up having to park about 8 blocks away, and it was very hard to figure out exactly where we were because all of the landmarks were gone. Just it was leveled in that area. We walked to where we thought was our street, and we did find that there was some areas to the south that we did recognize, so we started walking. And we walked a couple of blocks further, and we got to our house. And when we got to our house, it was still standing. 3 houses to the north was where the leveling had started. The east wall that we were looking at looked like there was no damage. Walked in, heart sank. There was bright sunshine coming through in our hallway and our bedroom area. We ended up having a total of 8 large holes in the west roof of our duplex we were living in.
KKOW radio personality Bobby Wilkerson recalls what happened on May 22nd, 2011, just like it was yesterday. His home was mere yards away from the tornado's devastation.
The street I lived on was a dead-end street. We lived kind of at the beginning of a dead-end street, and the end of the street was completely wiped out. We missed us by about 150 yards. The actual destruction, we lost a few shingles and, nothing major. The house was completely covered in insulation. It was, I remember walking out of the door and there was a stuffed animal in our front yard, along with tons of other debris. And thinking, oh my God, that's some little kid's stuffed animal, and now where's the little kid? We wrote it out at home with a friend of ours, and her boyfriend was in the process of driving through town at the time. We knew he was, and he was trying to get home before the storm hit, and he was going from the north side of Joplin to the south side, and there was panic everywhere. Nobody could get a hold of anyone. Cell towers were destroyed, and so cell service was, and not to mention everybody was trying to get through, so what little there was jammed up. And We couldn't get in touch with him, and he was driving on the street, on a street not far from our house, and we knew he was going to be going right through the middle of the path of it. And so we took off looking for him, immediately knowing that he was probably driving when it happened. I remember that. I remember searching frantically for him. It was impossible to drive. Roads were immediately packed. People were all trying to get to their loved ones. I remember parking I had a truck at the time. All three of us got in. We took off looking for him. His name was Jesse, and getting maybe a mile away from our house, realizing this isn't going to work, and we parked the truck and took off on foot, and everybody's screaming, names out looking for folks. That's when you really realize what it had done. And I didn't still know how big it was at the time, but that specific guy got picked up in a Honda Civic and rode it out. He remembers landing once, feeling himself getting picked up off the ground, closing his eyes. He said, I landed once. He was in someone's living room, and pictures were still on the wall of a family, and he could feel it pick him up again. And at some point in there, he was knocked unconscious, and one of his friends from high school woke him up, and he was about 1.5 miles from where he'd been picked up at 20th and about St. Louis in there. One of his high school friends shaking him, asking him if he was okay. And he'd been picked up about 1.5 miles away, and that's the last he remembers. So I don't know, thinking about it, I was extremely lucky and terrified all the while, and then not knowing what had happened to everyone else and trying to get a hold of other people or trying to get to them, it was a nightmare. It was absolute chaos. I've never seen public chaos on that level like I did that day.
Why was there such a loss of life? How was Joplin warned? Could there be a way to improve the warnings to save more lives? In July of 2011, an assessment was published by the National Weather Service. The team involved examined the warnings and forecasts, and because of the large loss of life, they broke down dissemination, preparedness, and the community's response to the warnings.
Nearly 100 tornado survivors, local business people, media, emergency management, city officials, and National Weather Service staff were interviewed. They found that the majority of Joplin residents didn't immediately take protective action after the first indication of risk. Most waited for additional information, but whether they took shelter or not largely depended on their experience with severe weather.
Steve Scott agrees.
I think that one of the things that happened prior to the May 22nd tornado was correct. They had sounded the sirens quite a bit when nothing had happened. The first siren sounded at 5:17, which that was quite a bit before the tornado actually hit.
What finally caused those who survived to seek shelter? There were different ways. Getting confirmation there was a tornado, actually seeing the tornado, the urgency on radio and television, or hearing a second sounding of the sirens.
They did sound it a second time, and I do think that at that point it probably did mean something to some people that had not possibly taken coverage.
Meteorologist Mike Smith has thoroughly studied what happened in Joplin that day, and he authored the book, When the Sirens Were Silent. He believes there were multiple reasons the fatalities were so high.
Well, I think everything that could go wrong did go wrong. While a tornado of that intensity and that size, the damage track in Joplin in places is nearly 1 mile wide, is going to cause many deaths. I mean, it's just inevitable. Even if the warnings had been good, there would have been deaths well into the double digits. But the Joplin tornado stands out because since the civilian warning program began, let's say in 1957, there has never been a single tornado with a triple-digit death toll. And this wasn't 105 or 106. It was 161. That's a very big number. And I think the things that caused the very high death toll were, one, the tornado was invisible. Unfortunately, in Tornado Alley, when a tornado warning occurs, people go out to look for the tornado, and they could not see it. Very intelligent people, such as the Joplin superintendent of schools, actually drove into the tornado because they had no idea what they were driving into. It didn't look like a tornado. So that was problem number one. Even if there had been perfect warnings, there would have been a somewhat higher death toll due to the fact the tornado was rain-wrapped and invisible. That's problem number one. The next problem is that the National Weather Service put out a tornado warning for northern Jasper County, which did not include the city of Joplin. However, the emergency manager made the decision, even though he didn't have to. He had sirens that could sound only in the threatened areas. Like so many other emergency managers, he had this, we're going to sound the sirens over the whole county or no sirens. And so he sounded them in Joplin. Well, the problem was people then turned on their radio, turned on their TV, and they saw the meteorologist say, this tornado is up near Carl Junction, which is a little town north of Joplin. That's in the path. Joplin is not in the path of the tornado. Then, a few minutes later, the National Weather Service put out the tornado warning for Joplin, which included the eventual path of the tornado. The emergency manager made the decision not to sound the sirens because he had just sounded them a few minutes earlier. But because people were told after the siren sounded the first time that there was no threat to Joplin, unless they were sitting there monitoring the radio or TV, they had no way of knowing that their situation had changed from relative safety to mortal danger. The sirens stayed silent as the tornado got closer and closer and closer to Joplin. And then finally, at about 3 minutes before the tornado crossed into the city limits of Joplin, storm chaser Jeff Petrowski pulled alongside a police car on the northwest side of Joplin and pleaded with them to turn the sirens on, and they did so. However, the tornado had already been doing EF4 intensity damage at that point, and it was too late for people on the west side of Joplin. Moments later, fatalities were starting to occur. One of the TV stations had KSNF TV, the NBC affiliate, had a tower camera that was pointed at the tornado toward the south-southwest. The TV station was north of the tornado's path. And so even though the rain curtain was between the tornado and the city of Joplin, because they were to the north, they could see the tornado. But the tornado looked so much unlike a tornado, at first they didn't even realize that they were broadcasting a tornado until they saw the multitude of power flashes. And when I interviewed Caitlin McCardle, the meteorologist who was on the air that day, and said, what was your impression when you realized there was a tornado moving into Joplin? And her exact words were, quote, I was shocked that there was a tornado in that location. And so even the TV meteorologists were surprised that there was a tornado moving into Joplin. And by the time the sirens were on the second time and the TV stations had sort of recovered and said, okay, Joplin, take cover, the tornado was already in the city doing considerable damage.
Mike Smith says Joplin is not the only example where there is an issue with the method that the public is warned. Less than a week later, he said he witnessed it again in a much larger city.
4 days later, I was in St. Louis giving a speech to the Rotary Club of St. Louis. And that afternoon, I was in my hotel room looking southeast. The tornado sirens were on. The TV stations were breaking in. And I could very clearly see the funnel cloud. And I have a photo of the funnel crossing the Mississippi River with the south leg of the Gateway Arch in the photograph. the National Weather Service renewed the tornado warning for the city of St. Louis because I guess the downtown area was still theoretically threatened. Yet the emergency manager sounded the sirens over all of St. Louis City and St. Louis County. You may or may not be aware the city of St. Louis is a separate entity than St. Louis County. So that meant the tornado sirens were going off in Pacific, Missouri, 35 miles behind the tornado with absolutely no threat to that area. Well, I happened to have a TV interview on KMOX or KMOV TV the next day, and I criticized on the air the emergency manager for sounding the sirens 35 miles behind the tornado. And they went and interviewed the emergency manager, and it was the usual, well, we'd rather be safe than sorry. Well, what's happening in these situations is when you sound sirens time after time after time after time in areas that are not threatened, you're not better safe than sorry. You're inadvertently training people not to pay attention to the sirens and the storm warnings. That is what's actually happening, not better safe than sorry. So, yes, I do have a criticism for the emergency managers who, with the state-of-the-art in tornado warnings in 2016, which has gotten to be very good, continuing to sound sirens over these vast geographic areas that are not actually threatened.
We've learned a lot from the tragedy in Joplin, but what if it were to happen again? Would residents know what to do? Mike Smith says there is one safety rule that everyone should follow in a tornado warning.
Take shelter immediately when you hear a tornado warning. Don't go outside and look. People do get killed by flying debris around the tornado, and they can get killed at a considerable distance. A piece of sheet metal with a jagged edge has no conscience. It will go wherever the tornado flings it, and if you happen to be there, even if you're hundreds of yards away, it could cost you your life. Get into the basement if you have one. Get into a closet or bathtub in the middle of your house. I am passionate about people following the safety rules because while we still issue the occasional false alarm, the geographic area of tornado warnings has shrunk, meaning there are fewer square miles warned. The credibility of the warning is better than it's ever been. And the only way we are going to continue to save lives in tornadoes is if people will pay attention to them. It is just heartbreaking to me to hear stories of people who were in the warning area and for one reason or another didn't take shelter, and then they lose their lives or are seriously injured, even being crippled for life.
What is your tornado tale? If you have a story you'd like to share, call us toll-free, 800-439-1570. That's 800-439-1570.
Just minutes after the tornado tore through Joplin, a local woman and her daughter came up with a plan that would ultimately keep the communities connected in a time of total chaos. Rebecca Williams and her daughter Genevieve sprung into action.
Well, I'm a former registered nurse, and we were hearing things that indicated that perhaps my help was needed, but we couldn't get information here locally. Our Wi-Fi was down. Most of the television stations were power was out. There was an information vacuum locally, and we were checking social media. Many of the reports that we were reading, most of them did turn out to be true, but they just seemed so incredulous. They were unbelievable, like that the hospital had been hit and such. And so Genevieve turned to me and she said, I know how we could get more information. I'll start a Facebook page. And that's how it was born.
And how did the page grow?
The page grew very, very quickly. I would say within an hour we were functioning and benefiting some people. One thing that Genevieve did was she spent quite a bit of time deciding what to name the page, and she determined Joplin Tornado Info would have the best search engine optimization. And as it turned out, I believe she was correct that there was quite a bit of that because people were going online and searching for Joplin tornado information. I would get on people's pages and pertinent pages and say, we've launched this Facebook page, Joplin Tornado Info, look for it. And within 2 hours, we were over 10,000. Within 36 hours, we had almost 50,000 followers, very active followers. They weren't followers, they were community members, and we established that very early on.
We asked Rebecca what things were being shared on Joplin Tornado Info.
To begin with, it was situational awareness, because like I said, there was such an information vacuum throughout the region, and certainly people who were affected, who'd lost their homes and all, were relying on smartphones. We later learned that people, for instance, we got a message that someone in Chicago was following our page and then text messaging information to someone who was at ground zero looking for triage. So it was utilized that way. To begin with, it was triage information, evacuation information. People were looking for lost loved ones. Very early on, a group of people, Travis Christensen happened to be one of them, someone I'm acquainted with, that we were not in communication for this. He worked at Crowder College, a community college here in Neosho, and had the key to the computer lab. He opened the computer lab there, which had Wi-Fi, and a group of 5 or 10 people started scouring Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, and feeding information to the Joplin Tornado Info page. And that was extremely helpful. There are also quite a few digital humanitarians, people whose hobbies or livelihoods are social media emergency management, and many of them stepped in and started feeding information to us. So fairly quickly, we didn't have to aggregate our own information. We just had to vet what was coming into us.
Rebecca Williams says social media was just one tool. More help was needed from other sources in Joplin.
You must rely on all forms of communication. Social media is just a piece of the puzzle. You need everything from television to AM radio. You need flyers. You need your town crier. You need it all. But in this day and age, social media emergency management is an excellent tool. It's just a priceless infrastructure asset that's part of the picture.
The tens of thousands of people who liked the Joplin Tornado Info Facebook page became a big family, helping each other beyond the tornado. And the idea just may be a way for other communities to use Rebecca and her daughter's plan in a future time of need.
What I would like to say is I would urge every community to have a social media emergency management infrastructure in place that is not tied with your emergency management and these entities that are so heavily tasked after a disaster. If the community has a social media emergency management effort that stands alone, that is their job in a disaster, I think that's a wonderful thing for a community. We have a little template that we put together that we're going to make available at no charge for any city helping group, whatever entity, it'll be available for download. And it's just a little template on here, basic, very basic. Here's how you do it. This is what you set up. This is how you get your community involved.
The hope is that there will never be a disaster in Joplin again, like what happened on May 22nd, 2011. KKOW's Bobby Wilkerson says when the sirens sound today, people have been forever changed on how they react.
I pay more attention to them. I know people around here pay more attention to them, and they're not blown off as they once were, or, well, that's, who knows how far away, or that's in the county, but, that may be miles away from us. People pay close attention to them, and there's a real eye on the weather around here because of it. I think it had a serious effect on the way people deal with them and actually take them seriously. I really do.
AMI Radio News Director Steve Scott says the lasting impression in his mind is the way people came to the aid of Joplin. Many arrived instantly and from miles and miles away.
When there was so much chaos going on in the city because of basically a third of the town had been wiped off the map. There were so many volunteers that were there trying to help, and within hours there was fire departments and law enforcement people from all across the state of Missouri, the state of Kansas, Oklahoma, even from Arkansas. We even had a group of firefighters from Kansas City that came down. The fact that they all came down and helped just really touched us, because of they didn't even wait 5 minutes. As soon as the thing was over, the search and rescue started immediately. That really meant a lot.
Next on Tornado Talk, a tornado wraps its way into Ray, Colorado to start an active May 2016. A prom couple pauses to grab a photo with a real tornado in their background.
Then tornadoes tear through south central Oklahoma, EF4 damage. And a radio station manager warns the public on the air moments before the station suffers a direct hit. May 2016 tornadoes on episode 5 of Tornado Talk.
This has been Tornado Talk, powered by thestormreport.com.